gamers, Power Word Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about Cell. So this is kind of like a long-awaited video. I know a lot of people have been waiting for this one, but I wanted to take my time because I want to make sure I have a setup that I'm comfortable with, and I am comfortable enough showing you the add-on so I can give you like actual useful information, right? So it just took a little bit to play with it. Now I have it set up how I want it, and we're kind of good to go. But I think the first thing to talk about is, what is Cell and why are we using it, right? So Cell is just an add-on for raid frames, basically. It lets you do like customizations that aren't possible with the normal frames, and that's basically also the reason like why we're using it, right? Typically, I'm somebody who likes to do things, with as little add-ons as possible. And it's not necessarily because I'm against add-ons, although I could make a whole separate video talking about my stance on add-ons. But it's really just for consistency's sake. If there's something that I don't need to have displayed with an add-on, then I like to have it displayed with just the normal game, because then I know that it's not going to break. Patch isn't going to mess it up. It's not going to get discontinued down the road, right? So there's all these things that kind of come into play with using add-ons that you don't have to deal with if you're just doing something in the base game. That's why I have all my mouse over macros just, made as macros, and I don't use something like click casting or anything like that. There's nothing inherently wrong with click casting. It's just that obviously, things can break and stuff like that. And then also, I feel like one of the issues with having a ton of add-ons and a ton of weak auras is that it does just like slow down your game. And people always say like, oh, well, that's not really a thing anymore because, computers, you're just way faster nowadays. I feel like it's not really something that has to do with the computer in that sense in a lot of cases. Like, it's not like your raw processing speed that seems to be the bottleneck. It's causing some issue within the game when you have all these things active. Some of them are maybe poorly coded. They're not running well, right? So it's kind of like less about just there being too much there and more about sometimes being like what's there is not optimized, right? So I try and stay away from, going into excessive add-on use when it's not necessary, but this Cell add-on really is incredible, and that's why I want to show it to you guys. And the two main reasons that I use it over the default, I would say it's first the customization in terms of the debuff selection that you can see on like your raid frames basically. And then the next aspect of it is the aggro and how that's displayed. And it's just done much better in Cell basically. And to kind of give you an example of like the primary thing, which is the debuffs, if I am wanting to see something like Blood Fury, for example, right? The debuff that 50% reduce healing when you press it. A lot of DPS use this if you're Horde. Then if I want to see that by default, I have to unclick the thing in the default UI that says only show dispellable debuffs. Now that kind of sounds fine on the surface, but the problem is there's basically a ton of debuffs that I don't want to see, that I can't dispel, right, that I now have to see because I checked off this option. And if I don't want to see them more, I can check the option again, but now I can't see the useful stuff like Blood Fury and stuff like that. So this is all easily handled with something like Cell, and you have no way to handle it with the default UI. So that's why your hand is basically forced there, right? So we'll kind of get into things, right? So we'll go options. I think it's Cell options. Okay, there we go. So this brings up the main option menu, and this just has like everything in it basically. So anything you're going to need to do to control the add-on is done through this menu. And we'll basically just go one by one, and we'll try and make this as quick as possible. So the general tab is pretty self-explanatory. This is just when it's going to show you the Cell stuff. I think if I click this, it's just going to show my name here all the time. I don't bother. But it's going to show you if you're in a party, if you're in a raid, and then these are to hide the Blizzard settings, obviously, which you want because you don't want two versions on the screen at the same time, right? So that's pretty self-explanatory. This locks the frames. The tooltip thing just would show the tooltip in the corner. So for example, if I do this and then I mouse over, it shows the tooltip in the corner. If I disable it, there's no tooltip, as you can see. I just have it disabled. This disabled as well. And then you can set nicknames for people in your group. Typically it just does this, I think, based, like if they have a long name, it just abbreviates it with the first X amount of letters. You can choose that. But if you want to set like something completely custom, you can. So that can be useful. And then I think the main interesting thing on this page is this faster health updates. Now, I use this. I've seen retail players talk about this add-on. They say that this lags them. I think the thing is there's just so much like less going on in Classic that it's not really a big deal to have this turned on. And you're also just using way less weak auras and stuff like that in general in Classic. So I think using this is not really a problem for me. And I do notice the difference. I feel like you really can notice the difference. It's subtle, but it is noticeable. So, yeah, I just think if you can afford to use this, you should use it. And I think you probably will be able to in WoW Classic. So this is the first general panel, right? Then we'll go to appearance next. So this just does a couple things like colors and stuff like that. I like class colors. And then the power bar colors, so this will be like blue for mana, like red for rage, so that's pretty standard. Heal prediction, I have it on green here, but I actually think my favorite setting is just to have it the default, which is that it's kind of like a more grayed out version of the bar. So this is a bit more gray than like the white, and it's not quite black, but I mean it doesn't really matter, right? You can set that however you want. And then there's stuff like this bar animation. So flash, basically, you'll see here, it kind of shows that you get chunked down like this. If I change this to smooth, right, then you'll see that it transitions a bit differently. I tend to like the flash just because people are getting chunked out in this game a lot anyway. And I feel like if you have it on smooth, it's kind of like almost a juxtaposition where the game is, the add-on's trying to show it to you in a smooth manner, but there's no way to show something really smooth when it's just like chunking down anyways, right? So I just tend to have it as flash, but you can obviously change that if you want. And then you have your debuff colors down here at the bottom. This is just denoting like if there's a magic debuff, there's a blue background, poison, green, right? I'll get into debuffs later and why that doesn't really apply to me, but for now, that's just the debuffs down there. So this is for click casting. I don't use click casting, but I use mouse overs, but I have it obviously just all done in the macro, whereas click casting is just like it's gonna cast. This basically acts like a click add-on as well, right? So you can have that happen. I just don't really use this, but you can if you want. So this is just more information. Then layout, so this shows you, like, we can turn the preview on. This is what it's going to look like for party. This is what it's going to look like for raid. And then these are the pets, right? These are the groups. You can control everything here, all the sizes, stuff like that, right? Power bars, everything. You can do it for pets, NPCs, right? So just tons of options here. And you can save layouts and stuff. So pretty self-explanatory here. And these are my base settings, basically. And, something that a lot of people like to talk about, I was actually just talking to a guildie about this, is the positioning of your frames. And I prefer them definitely down here. He's not the biggest fan because he wants to be able to see stuff that's behind him. But I think you have enough room to basically see stuff that's behind you, especially if you have, if you're zoomed out enough, right? And, I think like on top of that, you can kind of like the frames, you can see stuff through the frames anyway, right? And I'd rather have this real estate a bit more clean. Obviously you can remove these are just kind of there for memes, but normally this stuff would be cleaned up if I'm raiding. So I'd much rather have the thing down here than over here. And also, like, I feel like you're, usually since your character's in the front, like usually I'm using my mouse closer to the middle of the screen in the bottom, so it's much more instinctual to just like zip it around down here than to have to like move it up over here and be like healing weird spots over here, and then you know what I mean. So I just prefer it below the character, but that's just personal preference. Obviously you can have it anywhere where you can functionally perform with it, right? So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about layouts. And then indicators. So this is like the heart, I would say, of the add-on right here. And we're going to go through each one of these, or most of them. If they're completely like grayed out here, it just means they're turned off. And I'll explain to you kind of like why I have them turned off. We'll go through them one by one. So name text just shows the name. Obviously, it's not. And then there's like settings you can do for where it shows the size. Nothing super crazy there. You want this obviously because you want to be able to tell who your tanks are. You want to be able to tell like if somebody has a specific job, who they are in the raid frames. So that's good. Then status text. This is good because it shows you people that are drinking, stuff like that. Feign death, dead, AFK. Nothing wrong with that, right? People who've DC'd. So that's just good. Health text. I don't use this because you just don't need to, in my opinion. Power text, same thing. I don't need to know the exact amount. I just need the power bar there. Health thresholds, this kind of like sets health thresholds that I think this like line will activate at certain things. This isn't really that useful in my opinion in Classic because you're typically not looking to keep people below a threshold, but there may be other applications in retail or just other versions of the game. I could see an example being like the fight in Trial of the Grand Crusader. Is it like a Nubercon or a Nuberec, whatever the last boss, where you don't like you want people to stay low, I think, because the dot deals less damage to them when they're low, so you have to expend less healing. I could see something like that, but not really that useful in Classic, so I don't have it on. Status icon, just for like reses and stuff. That's fine. Party leader thing doesn't matter, or party assignment. Party leader doesn't matter. You can see like when I click on each of these, it shows what it is in the position that it's in, right? Raid check icon's always nice. These raid icons, they can be helpful, especially like if somebody's marking a tank and it's like your tank's going to be square. You can have this show up so it shows up on your raid frames as a square on that guy's portrait, which is nice. But I basically know my raiders at this point. I know who I'm healing, so I just don't need to use this. They're pretty much usually in the same spot every week, but it can be really helpful if you're more unfamiliar with that type of stuff. Same thing for the target versus the player here, right? And then the aggro things, this is where it starts to get interesting. So there's multiple different ways you can display aggro. There's the blink box, there's this box, the bar, I guess, and the border. I like the border. Obviously, you can change the settings of all these in their respective sections. You can adjust here, like how intense. Like if I put this at 3, the outline isn't quite as great, but if I put it at 6, it's pretty great. So I like to keep it around 6. You can change that, obviously, if you want. And this is basically huge because it's showing you aggro, and this is a huge advantage. Like if you're playing with this and somebody else isn't, you just have a huge advantage over them because you can basically see when damage is going to come before it comes, right? Because as soon as somebody gets threat, their bar lights up here. Now, obviously, just because they gut threat doesn't mean they're necessarily going to get hit, so you have to deal with that sometimes. Also, there seems to be a thing where sometimes, like, a lot of frames will have this, and I'm unsure exactly what's going on. Like, it could be that a lot of the threshold for, I assume this works based on, like, the actual numerical threat. Like, it's got some type of built-in threat meter, or something like that, and, basically, maybe multiple people are sort of, like, tied or close to it, so they'll all show up as, like, lighting up. So sometimes it's not as useful, but a lot of times it's pretty useful, to be honest, right? So it's definitely better to have than not to have, and it just makes you a better player, in my opinion, because you can just basically see what's coming, right? If a mage gets this icon, you want to shield them, basically, right? Or this backdrop, rather. It can help on just because tanks switch aggro, or mobs switch aggro on tanks a lot. Sometimes during lava packs, people pull threat. It helps with all that stuff, right? So just really useful feature here, and this is how I prefer to have it displayed, but you can use any of the other settings if you want, obviously. So AoE healing, this is not really necessary to have turned on, but it's kind of like whatever. It just shows you like who you're going to be healing with your AoE heals, but you already know as a priest like it's going to be the party, so it's not really a huge deal there. External, so this is stuff like BOP, right? I think that's like the main external in this version of the game. And it just displays it over here. You can see who's bopped or whatever. We don't have bop obviously on this side, but there may be another external I'm not thinking of. Defensive, it's this basically the same thing as externals. It just shows on the opposite side, and stuff like shield wall, stuff like that. Bark skin, really useful to just see this, see when your tank has it up. This one combines the two and puts them on one side. There's not really a need. One thing about this add-on as a whole is that it's kind of obviously developed for retail in mind. So there's a lot of extra functionality in here that is just a bit over the top for classic. Obviously, like this being able to put them together is just not really that useful because you don't even really have externals, I don't think, on the horde anyway, right? So that you just don't even have like you're basically only seeing defensive cooldowns. So yeah, you don't have to like worry about all this stuff necessarily. Not all of it is applicable, but some of it is, and the stuff that is really good. So dispels, this might be the most controversial part, but I have this completely disabled. So this basically just shows you this tint based on what the type of dispel is, right? So magic is blue, poison is that, right? So if somebody had a debuff on them, it would show with this backdrop if it could be dispelled by a certain thing. And you can obviously check this so it only shows this for like dispellable stuff. But realistically, I just didn't like it because for me, I don't need like this, gradient appearing on the screen for no reason with this weird icon. I just want to see the actual dispel icon. I want to know what it is. I know the spells like off the top of my head basically at this point. I've played the game for a while, so I just need to see the icon. I don't need to have this like weird backdrop. If you're like very new and you don't know like what's what, like what's a magic, what's a curse, what's a poison, this could be helpful for you. So I'm not saying to completely write it off, but for me, I just don't really need it, obviously, right? So yeah, we don't bother with that. And then going into the debuffs, so debuffs are distinct from dispels, obviously, right? Because the idea with dispel is that it can be cleansed by something. Okay, not all debuffs are like that. And if you turn off dispels, it's not like it's turning off debuffs, if that makes sense. As long as you have this debuffs things on, it's going to show you all the debuffs that pop up, whether they're magic or poison or whatever, right? It's just not going to have the gradient here that you see, which is what that specific functionality is for, right? So I have this basically set up where I keep the default where they appear. I keep the number of them the same because in the raid setting, you're not really going to get more than that anyway. And what I basically do to increase the functionality here is you notice we have the same thing. We have only show debuff dispel by me, right? Now, if you click this, you're in the same situation you were before, right, with the default frames where now it's blocking like potentially useful stuff you want to see because there's some potentially useful stuff you want to see that you can't dispel. So what you do instead of clicking this and blocking all that stuff, you know in the raid what you don't want to see, right? And what you can do is you just click this button, right? And you put the spell ID in, and it blocks that because it adds it to the blacklist. See how it says the blacklist? And how you get the spell ID is you just go on Wowhead, make sure you're on classic version, right? And then you search for like the boss, like Ragnaros, or the mob if it's like a Fire Lord, Molten Core, whatever the mob name is. You click on the mob. There should be a cog, like kind of like to the upper right hand, I think, corner, something like that. There's a cog somewhere on the screen. You right click it, and there's a spell ID thing. Oh, actually, you have to go to the abilities for the boss. Sorry. Then you click on the ability. Then there's a cog somewhere, and it shows the spell ID, and you can just click on it, copies it auto, I think, and then you just paste it right in here. So yeah, you just copy and paste the spell ID, and then you're basically good to go for whatever you don't want to see. So I have Luciferon's Curse blacklisted because I don't need to see this because I need to do my job regardless of whether the curse is on me, even though it's making me spend more mana. Shazar's Curse, kind of like the same thing. I mean, you could argue that maybe you want to see this, but realistically, like, you're just trying to get shields and heals on whoever you can. And my Shazar fight lasts so little amount of time that seeing this is basically irrelevant anyway. If you have like a longer Shazar fight, then it may be worth it to see the Shazar curse, because obviously you want to give more attention to somebody who's got the curse on them because they're going to be taking more damage. But in my case, I just don't need it, so I have it blocked. Ancient Hysteria, I have it blocked since I can't spell it. And then I have Cauterizing Flames and Insight Flames blocked. Now, Insight Flames is an obvious one because, you know, it's like a 1 minute debuff. It stacks, it gets applied nonstop. So there's no reason to waste your mana dispelling it. It's also applied during lava packs where you need to be doing healing most of the time. So there's no point in really wasting dispels on this. Cauterizing Flames is like 15 minutes, so it's kind of like a better dispel than Insight Flames, but again, it's just not something that's a priority typically. So I just have this blocked completely, and usually other priests will get it off if they want, but we're kind of all getting it off on our own leisure. Like, basically when we have the mana to, right? We're not super worried about it as like a primary thing, which is why I don't have it show up here. And it usually just gets kind of cleansed by itself as we're cleansing other things from people. Now, you can, instead of blocking things with the blacklist, you can make them bigger here. So, like, you can put the spell ID in for big debuffs, and it would show it bigger than these other ones. You can show the duration if you want. I don't really tend to do that. But, yeah, that's basically how the debuffs work. And, yeah, that's base debuffs. Now, you're going to see the next thing as raid debuffs. Okay, now, these are basically how raid debuffs work, is that raid debuffs is just like it's a special function that was created for this add-on to show you the debuff front and center from a raid mob or a raid boss. So it'll basically like appear in the center of the screen here. As you can see, you can customize all the settings here. But it's basically just like something meant to be jarring, catch your attention. If there's something on a boss that really needs to be dispelled ASAP, you can have it displayed like this. And basically how it works is like, this is going to, I believe, take priority. Like, this will always show up on the screen if it's like a raid boss debuff. And if it's a normal debuff, it takes like a lesser priority. Usually that's not really a problem anyway, though, because you're not going into like a like you're not, there's no minor debuff that you would need to see over the raid debuff at any given time, basically. So it's kind of like fine how it works like that. Some people don't use raid debuffs. Like, you don't need to have this enabled. Like, debuff shows everything. For example, like on Lucifron, the mind control, if you didn't have raid buffs enabled here, if you had this disabled, you just had debuffs, it would still show the mind control show up on the player. It would just be in a small box like this, as opposed to, you can configure it so it's kind of like the big thing on the screen here, right? And all these settings right here basically have to do with like the size and where this is showing up and stuff like that, right? And to actually add debuffs in or change the priority order that they show up in here, you have to click on this raid debuffs thing right here, okay? And you set it up like this. So you're in the instance, you just pick the instance, then you pick general is like everything, so the trash, right? And then there's specific bosses. And then you basically do the same thing you did over here when you were blocking stuff with the debuffs over here, right? Except now you're putting in the spell ID to show stuff. Okay, so if I put in the spell ID for Soulburn, it's going to show Soulburn. Now, I'd see Soulburn anyway since it's a debuff and we have debuffs active already. But what it's going to do when I put it in here in the raid debuffs is it's going to show me in that big manner, right? It's going to have the, we'll go back to raid debuffs here. It's going to have Soulburn appear right in the middle, and it's going to be big. And I'm going to have the, you can do other customizations to it, like the glow type I have here, right? And basically how this works is a priority order. So the thing on top has the highest priority. These should actually be swapped. It says you can drag them. In my experience, that doesn't work. But what you can basically do is just delete them and reapply them. So I think they get applied in order. So for example, if I put Soulburn in first, it's on top. Then whatever I put in next will be below that, and then next will be below that. So if I wanted to swap the order of these, I just delete them and I put Withering Heat in next and then Ancient Dread in last, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's an easy way to just fix the order there. And what that does is it's the priority, right? So Soulburn is always going to be what's going to show up first on the frame, right? And then if that's not there, it'll show the other one, Ancient Dread, and then if that's not there, it'll show Withering Heat. So that's basically how the priority system works. And that's more than fine for Molten Core because you're never having like two debuffs that are like equally pressing at the same, you know what I mean? And you dispel two debuffs at the same time anyway. So it's basically fine having it like this. And in terms of the glow, I only do the glow for stuff that's kind of like important and sort of like rare, if that makes sense. Because, for example, like having it light up when a Soulburn comes on my frames is good. But if I had this happen with Ancient Dread, just your whole bar, like your whole unit frames here would just be lit up, right? Which isn't really that helpful and just kind of visually distracting. Whereas in this case, since it's only one of them going out, it pulls your attention to where it is on the debuff list, right? So I generally like that. And these are the settings and the order that I have. Like I said, I'd replace Ancient Dread here with Withering Heat. I'd swap the order. I need to do that. But that's basically the trash debuffs. And then for the boss debuffs, you can go one by one and do the same thing. You put the thing in. On Lucifron, I only care about Dominate Mind. Now, you could argue that, we're going to be spamming the macro anyway. I'm going to make a whole video on the Lucifron macro. But basically, the reason why I have this is because it helps you check to see if the macro is like actually working, which I'll talk more in detail about in the Lucifron video. But, if I don't have any way of seeing the mind control debuff on my frames, then what happens is like maybe I'm in a spot where I actually can't get the dispel off, and I can't even see that it's not coming off, right? Whereas like if I have this stuff on my frames, I can see it show up on the frame, and I can see it instantly get dispelled. And if it doesn't instantly get dispelled, I know I have to reposition, right? So that's why I still like having Dominate Mind up there. I don't bother putting the other debuff because it goes on everybody, and your job as a priest is basically just to make sure nobody gets killed by the Dom Mine. So Magmadar, I don't have anything. For Genis, I have the Curse. This is another fantastic example of being able to, have something that is something you can't dispel that you want to see, right? And you want to be able to see it in a prominent place, right? And you just can't do this with the default add-on without seeing a bunch of other useless stuff. And, I mean, you can turn it on and turn it off, but then obviously you have to go back into the menu every time. It's annoying. So it's just better to do it with the add-on, in my opinion. So that's Genesis Curse. We don't have anything for Gar. We don't have anything for Shazara. Baron Geddon, the order's messed up here. The bomb should be above, but I have Ignite Mana, obviously, because it's huge. And then the bomb is another huge thing you want to be able to see. And yeah, that's basically everything. So it doesn't take that long to set this stuff up, realistically. It's pretty easy, just copying over the spell IDs and stuff like that. And it's super helpful to just make sure that you can see all the debuffs super clearly. And it's a game changer for me. I don't know, it's like way better than the default. Now, going into the utilities over here, there's some stuff with like buff tracking. If I turn this on, I don't know why you can't see it, but basically, usually where it would show, maybe I have it like dragged off screen or something, but it just shows you when you don't have, it's because the icon has to be there. Okay, so what I would do is I would go in here, put this right, and then watch if I put buff tracker, and I guess it doesn't quite work. But anyway, what this does is it basically shows you your buffs like little icons, right? And then if you don't have it, it'll be like highlighted in red, and you can have like a little glow around it or something. You can also do this, this is like for your personal character, but you can do it in the raid. You can see missing buffs right here, and it shows the stuff. And then if you enable it, and you don't have like a fort or something like that, it'll show it in red. You can show it for only your buffs, which I think is, if you're going to use this is probably how you should do it, right? Because I like, you don't really care about seeing if other people don't have like arcane intellect, because you can check yourself if you have it or not, right? You don't want to use that much real estate. You just want to be able to see if they have the buffs that you need to put on them, right? So this can be helpful for sure. Then we have targeted spells. So targeted spells is, I think there's just a distinction here from debuffs, because some of these can't be like dispelled or removed at all. And I think this one that you see actually here is from, it's like the symbol from the AQ. It's like the AQ debuff where they put it on you and it like rots you and does a ton of damage to people around you. So having this active is like going to be good for an instance like that. There's not many instances of stuff like this, but I just keep it on for when it is there. And it also like automatically highlights in this really unique way, right? So you could change the glow type if you want here too. I think this is actually better, so I'll probably keep it like that. And yeah, that's obviously good for just targeted stuff. I don't know exactly what this does. I think it's like it keeps track of certain things used maybe, or something like that, it looks like. As long as I can get information from the nameplates, it looks like, or something. So not 100% sure on that. This is kind of going to just show how some of these effects are displayed, right? And then missing buffs we already went over. And this healers thing is basically, it shows stuff like HOTS, and you can enable it to show only by you. You can disable that so you can see it from other people. Typically, the only thing you have to worry about here is like seeing power word shields, but the thing is you can see the debuff, the weakened soul, always anyway. So, for me, it's not really that important. It doesn't even let you put renew on somebody else unless you're like the main renew like if you have more plus healing, your renew will override theirs, or if it's from another priest. But I don't really run into that issue because I tend to not have the max amount of plus healing possible anyway. So I don't really need to see who's got renews on them, because if I try and renew them, it just tells me that I can't. I mean, I guess I would save a little bit of time not trying to do that, but it's just such a minuscule thing because you don't use a lot of renew anyway. But yeah, you can obviously customize this however you want, to show stuff like that. So I think that is basically everything. And yeah, so I will say, there's a click casting thing I think I already mentioned. I just do that normally. So yeah, there's no reason for me to do that. But yeah, this is just a really insane add-on. And like I said, particularly just being able to see the aggro changes super easily. And then on top of that, being able to, customize what debuffs show up in what scenario is just a game changer compared to the default. And I really, really think you should give this a try. I totally get it. You don't want to be messing with add-ons. You want to be playing the game. And that was kind of like, that's why the first like 3 or 4 raids you saw me do, I had the default UI. I just was like lazy. I hadn't bothered to set stuff up. And, for me, it was a big kind of like point where I was like, oh, I really don't want to do this, because I was going to actually use LVUI at first. And that has settings for like everything. It's not just the raid frames, right? So I was like dreading kind of going through all that. And I was mainly using it for the raid frames because of the heal prediction. Because the heal prediction, I feel like on these types of add-ons tends to be pretty good compared to the thing I was using before, which sometimes wouldn't even work. So I was like, I'm just going to skip LVUI. I'm going to see if I can find something different that's like just really easy to set up. And that was this. And the difference is like night and day. It doesn't change like how good you are of a player at your core or anything, but it basically does just make it easier for you to respond to situations, right? Which makes you a better player, effectively speaking. So I would recommend you guys download this or something like it. There's other add-ons. You don't have to use this one. There's stuff like Voodoo and stuff, but this is the one that I found to be the best for my personal recommendation. And yeah, I would download it and set it up. Probably takes like 1 to 3 hours at most. And, you know, you could set it up way faster, but you're probably just going to be fiddling with things for that amount of time. But it's worth it, in my opinion. You just do it right how you want to do the first time, then set it and forget it, and it's there for you basically always, right? So, yeah, I think this is absolutely something you want to have. It's going to definitely help you play better. And, yeah, that's all I can say about it. Nothing but good things, really. Super simple to use, too. So if this helped you at all, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and yeah, I'll talk to you guys next time. See ya.